This is Grafeneck chateau in Baden Wurttemberg in southwestern Germany. It was one of the locations the National Socialist regime used to murder what it considered to be life not worthy of life. In this video I shall examine how people were transported to Grafeneck as well as to the killing centres at Brandenburg, Hartheim, Sonnenstein, Bernburg and Hadamar, as well as examining the CVs and post-war fate of the two managing directors of the company that carried the victims to the gas chambers. Whilst I talk, I shall also show you some views around Grafeneck, which, as you can see in the video, is a very attractive place. The company that transported the victims to their deaths was called the Gemeinnützige Krankentransport, which translates to something like charitable ambulance company, or in short, Gekrat. Gekrat was a company, albeit non-profit making. It was registered in the commercial directory at the district court of Berlin-Charlottenburg on 18th of November 1939. It was headed by two managing directors, Reinhold Vorberg and Hermann Femina, whilst Gerhard Siebert was the deputy of Vorberg. He took over the management of the company in the summer of 1941. Vorberg was based at Grafeneck and personally managed the transports to all the killing centres. The company not only dealt with the transport of the victims, but also with the correspondence with their families, until the time in 1940 when this role was taken on by Dietrich Alles, who was the head of the central office of the euthanasia program, which is often referred to as T4, being the headquarters in Berlin, Tiergartenstraße 4. The company also transported prisoners from other camps. For example, on the 20th of July 1941, a transport of 575 prisoners from Auschwitz was brought to Pirna in passenger cars. The T4 program never actually stopped, although it officially ended in the summer of 1941. After this date, Gekrat continued to work as an ambulance, taking patients to hospitals and nursing homes. However, at least 14 of their drivers went to the death camps of Action Reinhardt in occupied Poland. The vehicle fleet, initially composed of 3 buses Vorberg had obtained from the Reichspost, 2 passenger cars that were mainly used for courier trips, and a postal delivery van that was based at Grafeneck. Richard von Hegener, who was one of the main organisers of the T4 program, procured more buses from the Reichspost for other killing centres. The Reichspost buses, like regular buses, were initially painted red and had post office number plates, that is RP. Von Hegener stated after the war that only around halfway through the program the buses were painted grey, which was designed to make them more difficult to see from the air in case of air raids. The windows were covered by curtains or were painted out. A transport could be 3 buses together with the passenger car heading the column. 2 nurses were allotted to each bus. Violent patients could be strapped to the seat. Nurses also had handcuffs with them. It often happened that people in the street could witness what was going on. For example, at Zweifelten, where patients were held before being sent to Grafeneck, it was said that the entire village knew what was going on. In Hadamar, residents were able to watch the victims getting out of the bus. In order to prevent outsiders from seeing what was happening, a covered aisle was soon built onto the side wing. Whereas patients probably didn't know what was about to happen to them, some resented being taken away and some needed to be forced into the buses. Within months, it was well known in Germany that people with physical and psychiatric problems were being murdered, and this led to protests. For example, Limburg Cathedral is only around 4 kilometers from Hadamar, and the Bishop of Limburg, Antonius Hilfrich, was concerned enough to write to his Reich Minister of Justice on the 13th of August 1941. He wrote, and I quote, "Buses with a large number of victims arrive in Hadamar frequently during the week. School children in the area know these buses and say, 'Here comes the murder box again.' After the arrival of such buses, the citizens of Hadamar watch the smoke rising from the chimney." Not only the victims' families, but also others such as state prosecutors and police wanted to find out what had happened to those who were taken away. However, Gekrat had no address in Berlin, nor telephone number. The address was a post office box, and letters were answered by one of the killing centres. Sometimes those killing centres wanted to make the families believe that the patients were still alive and being looked after in order to receive their rations or other goods. At other times, the families were informed of the death of the patient. So what happened to the two managing directors of the people who ran Gekrat? Reinhold Vorberg grew up in Königsberg. He completed a commercial apprenticeship, served with the Black Reichswehr for a few months, and stayed in Spain from 1927 to 1928. In 1930 he worked as a farmer in southwest Africa, but returned to Berlin in 1931. In 1932 Vorberg became self-employed and sold costume jewellery. His business went bankrupt in 1935. Vorberg, who had joined the NSDAP, membership number 139288, on the 1st of July 1930, was probably brought to the Führer's office by his cousin Victor Brack in 1936, and initially worked as a volunteer before getting his full-time job there in 1937. Victor Brack had been a member of the Nazi Party in SS since 1929 and headed part of the Führer Chancellery, and is one of the main criminals responsible for the killing of people who were mentally and physically challenged. I'll have a look at him in a separate video. Vorberg took part in the trial gassings at Brandenburg. When he was not at Grafeneck, he was working in the Führer's office, which was his main job. Being the managing director of Gekrat was only part-time, and for which he received only a small tax-free allowance. In April 1945 he escaped from Berlin to Bavaria by plane. He was taken prisoner by the Americans and released in the summer of 1945 thanks to fake documents. When Victor Brack was caught, correspondence found led the authorities to Vorberg, who was arrested and interned in a camp in Moosburg. After a year of imprisonment, he escaped and went to Heiligenhafen and Hamburg before settling in Neuss, where he registered in 1948 as Heinz Warburg with a fictional date of birth. A relative gave him a job in a paint factory in 1951, and then Vorberg found a job in a buildings materials factory in Bonn. In 1961, West German authorities started looking for him, and he decided he had to go to Spain, where he had lived in the 1920s. He was arrested by Spanish authorities and extradited the following year. His trial didn't begin until 1967. On the 20th of December 1968, a court in Frankfurt am Main sentenced Vorberg to 10 years in prison for his role in the murder of 70,237 people. The Federal Court of Justice confirmed the judgment in 1972. However, as more than two-thirds had been served in extradition and pre-trial detention, Vorberg was released. Hermann Femina was the son of an army officer in Munich. Even before he graduated from high school, he belonged to the Epp Freikorps. After the end of the Munich Soviet Republic, Femina studied mechanical engineering and German studies in Munich, where he met Victor Brack. He got a job in the movie business and apparently saw himself as a famous director, or something along those lines. However, the film industry didn't pay very well, so he worked as a truck driver and transport agent. In 1936, he joined the Nazi Party. In October 1939, his old friend from Munich, Victor Brack, was now a senior official of the Führer Chancellery for Action T4. That was how he got this job as being the second managing director of Gekrat. In April 1940 he took over the management of the transport at Grafeneck. Probably using his former contacts in the film industry, Schwenninger arranged for Hans Heffelmann from the Führer Chancellery to contact Tobis Film GmbH, which enabled the realization of film propaganda for the euthanasia program. Schwenninger was now involved in several film scripts, edits and film recordings. The film, Dasein ohne Leben, that's Existence Without Life, was directed and written by Schwenninger. Filming commenced in 1940 and was completed in early 1942. He also collaborated in the writing of the screenplay for Ich klage an, which in English is I Accuse. Now this film is something like you might see in sort of Hollywood type film in a way. It's not, it's clearly it's a propaganda film, but it's not it's what I would call a direct propaganda film. The plot of Ich klage an is that of a young wife suffering from multiple sclerosis, and she pleads with the doctors to kill her. So she meets a doctor who says no, the job of a doctor is to preserve life. Now her husband is a doctor and he gives her a fatal overdose and he's put on trial. The arguments at trial are put forth saying that prolonging life is sometimes contrary to nature and that death is a right as well as a duty. It culminates in the husband's declaration that he's accusing them of cruelty for trying to prevent such deaths. On the 1st of August 1940, Schwenninger, together with a hearse Stoppler from Tobis, received a request from the Minister of the Interior, signed by Herbert Linden, to make a scientific film for hospitals and nursing homes. This allowed Schwenninger to request the Württemberg Ministry of the Interior to give him access to their institutions. For the film project, lovely locations were sought out, which was meant to show where the patients were being kept. This beauty is then contrasted with deformed people who are portrayed as monsters, often using camera tricks with light and shadow. Some portions of these films have survived, but most were destroyed at the end of World War II. And the fact that they were destroyed surely shows that they knew that what they were doing was wrong. Schwenninger temporarily switched entirely to Tobis in the summer of 1942. In October 1942, the KDF approved a budget of 51,000 marks for film projects. Now, this would be roughly equivalent to around $20,000, which even then wouldn't really go very far. And to give two totally unfair comparisons, but these are films which people have actually heard of. The Goebbels' propaganda film Kohlberg cost 7.6 million marks, and if we take Casablanca, which was also made in the same year, Casablanca was made in 1942, that cost over $1 million. So you can see that $20,000 really isn't going to go particularly far. So all individual steps of Action T4 were filmed, from the bureaucratic filing system to the killing of the victims in a gas chamber. Furthermore, the filming of Dasein ohne Leben, Existence Without Life, could mean changes to the bureaucracy of killing. For example, on the 18th of March 1941, 40 handicapped people from a medical facility called Scheuer were brought to Pirna Sonnenstein instead of Hadamar, where they should have gone due to their location. So people were they were killed in the institution which was in their district, so to speak. And this actually continued during the Holocaust, where you could have a situation which I came across, for example, where people were deported from Płock, were in Auschwitz, but people could be deported, they could pass people from Częstochowa who were going to be murdered in Treblinka. It was very bureaucratic the way things were done. But in this case, the bureaucracy was forgotten about. As far as these people who were taken to Pirna to be murdered, Schwenninger had actually chosen them because of their physical appearance, which he thought suited his ends. So the transport took place by train with its accompanying staff. After 1945, Schwenninger testified in several federal German criminal trials, but he was never convicted. In 1983, he gave an interview to historians Goetz Ali and Karl-Heinz wrote, "He lived out the rest of his life untouched by judicial authorities. The last I know of him, I was able to find that he was still alive in Hamburg in 1985. So, if you found that of interest, please do subscribe. I shall be doing more on this subject. My history channel does deal with a variety of subjects, but what I'm particularly interested in is in the Second World War, and if I've got any expertise, I would have to say it was probably in the Holocaust. So, but I hope you'll subscribe, and if you get any benefit, please do consider giving some kind of support on Patreon, as it is somewhat difficult to actually finance things of this nature. Thank you very much for watching.